This Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live.
Yes, I think the Prime Minister fully understands and has the same sense of urgency.
Alberta moves closer to a deal with Ottawa on the future of the energy sector, which may include a pipeline to the West Coast. But the proposal still has plenty of hurdles, including buy-in from British Columbia. We'll talk to former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and the president of the Coastal First Nations in BC.
It will restart. The question is when. But it's not going to be easy.
It's been a month since trade talks with the U.S. collapsed after Ontario's anti-tariff ad. Is there hope of those talks resuming soon? We'll ask Ontario's representative to Washington, David Patterson. An exclusive interview with the top Democrat on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee on her push to repair the strained Canada-U.S. relationship. It all starts now on Rosemary Barton Live. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. We are learning more details around Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's push for a new pipeline from her province to the northern coast of British Columbia. It's part of a memorandum of understanding over the future of Alberta's energy sector that CBC News has learned is expected to be signed as early as this Thursday. The plan could transform Canada's energy sector, and it's already causing some tension between provinces.
We are making a very, very strong case that building a new pipeline to Asian markets is in the national interest. We are finding some receptivity on the part of the new Prime Minister.
Those discussions are ongoing. They have been constructive. There is a prospect of an agreement. It's not yet finalized. In my experience in these things is when things aren't final, it's better not to overly speculate on where they're going from there.
Still, CBC has learned that the agreement between the federal and provincial governments is expected to include language about a path forward for the potential pipeline project. Ottawa could also partially relax the law from the Trudeau era that bans tankers from BC's northern coast. Despite the many roadblocks still ahead for Premier Smith, including, of course, the lack of a proponent, many see the expected MOU as progress for the Premier in the province, who has long been advocating for a new pipeline and for better relations between Alberta and Ottawa. And the former Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, joins me now. Nice to see you in person.
Good to be here.
It sounds like we are on the verge of this memorandum of understanding between Ottawa and Alberta as early as Thursday, and it would apparently sort of get the province closer to the idea of a pipeline. How big a deal is this for Alberta?
Well, it's a huge deal for Canada. Sure. This is our largest export product by far. We sell $150 billion worth of Canadian crude, primarily from Alberta, every year, which is generates more wealth and more jobs than any other export industry. But we continue to be blocked by egress issues, pipeline issues. And if we got that done and added, let's say, something like 1 million barrels a day, we'd be selling, that would be generating something in the range of $25 billion of additional value, which is probably about $5 billion of taxes and royalties. I mean, that's stuff to build hospitals and stuff. So in an aging population, with the big trade challenges coming from south of the border, I think we have to do things like this, and I'm glad to hear there's progress being made on it.
It does sound as though the big hurdle will be, of course, British Columbia. First Nations on the coast have issues with the idea of another pipeline. The Premier is very upset that he has not been included in these conversations, doesn't like the idea that a tanker ban may be lifted or exempt for some sort of future project. What do you make of the hurdle that is British Columbia? Those are real concerns they have.
Well, in due course, if there is a specific project that applies for a permit from the National Energy Regulator, the British Columbia government would have every right to make its representations at the time, to express its concerns. But David Eby, frankly, I'm surprised he's a lawyer. He was the Attorney General who got absolutely humiliated when he tried to stop the Trans Mountain expansion. He had he passed a law to say BC could regulate an interprovincial pipeline. The BC Appeal Court unanimously said, no, you can't. No. This is a federal, exclusive federal jurisdiction, upheld unanimously by the Supreme Court of Canada. So I would say to Mr. Eby, do you believe in the Constitution and the rule of law or not? And are you on Team Canada or not? Because all of this this whinging that he's doing is has already it's out of bounds. It's unconstitutional. BC cannot stop interprovincial infrastructure like this.
They can't stop it, but they can certainly raise their concerns around it, and that is what he's doing. And he hasn't been consulted. So,
well, listen. Why doesn't he consult British Columbians? Every poll I've seen in the last year indicates a significant majority of British Columbians support this. And by the way, on First Nations. I don't buy the notion that there's a widespread opposition. When that was actually tested on the Trans Mountain expansion, the Supreme Court upheld a trial court finding that 111 of 119 Indigenous communities that had some putative interest were either supportive or neutral, and ultimately got built, as you saw, with very limited actual resistance. Same with Coastal GasLink. We heard a lot of noise about a couple of allegedly hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en. It got built with the support of every elected council there. And so what we have found is, as long as there's equity participation available to Indigenous communities, I have seen overwhelming support amongst Western Canadian First Nations for projects like this.
okay, what about the idea of just increasing the Trans Mountain pipeline? That is something that the Premier Eby does support, and there is additional capacity there.
Sure, I would take a both-and approach, but I do hope that they can focus on that as a constructive point of agreement without allowing the dispute over a potential Northwest pipeline to disrupt it. You could the Trans Mountain Company, which is a Crown corporation, federal corporation, could expand by upwards of 300,000 barrels a day shipments down to the Port of Vancouver, dredge the harbor, which means more capacity loaded into the tankers that come out of there safely. That would be really helpful. And Enbridge has some proposals to optimize their pipeline network that could also increase shipments. And I'm an advocate of finishing the Keystone XL project. It's no longer KXL technically, but that gets Trump to buy into additional Canadian exports. It would be a lot simpler and a lot cheaper to get that done, probably a lot more quickly as well.
In order for this agreement to go forward, there are things that Alberta will have to do around carbon capture and storage, around emissions. Is this kind of the Prime Minister's attempt to put the ball in Alberta's court and say, if you really want to do this, let's get you to commit to some movement on that front?
Well, I think that probably reflects his view, the federal government's view, and I think Alberta would say, welcome to the party. We were the first subnational jurisdiction, or the first jurisdiction in North America with an industrial price on carbon emissions, and Ralph Klein did that in 2005. And we used those resources in part to pay for the first large-scale CCUS, carbon sequestration projects in Canada, including the carbon trunk line that's taking sequestered CO2 off of refineries in the Edmonton refinery complex and injecting that into central Alberta, into the sedimentary basin there. So you've got this stuff that's already happening thanks to Alberta and industry leadership. Pathways has been leaning forward on this. So in principle, I think an agreement is possible there, as long as the cost is reasonable. Because if only the Canadian industry is having to pay for tens of billions of dollars of carbon sequestration infrastructure, and their competitors from Saudi Arabia to Russia to Texas are not, then we're at a huge global disadvantage.
Is a pipeline, do you think it's likely, given what we were just talking about in terms of capacity and increased capacity and other options? Another pipeline, is it likely?
It's possible. I would say a new Northwest Coast pipeline going to be hard to do. But if we get the right policy environment, lifting the emissions cap and the tanker ban and so forth, I think a proponent will come forward because the value is just enormous. Once you're shipping that amount of energy, you're talking over its lifetime about hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue being generated. That spins off tolls that easily pays for the infrastructure over time.
Okay. Jason Kenney, nice to see you. The potential pipeline project, of course, has opposition, as we've been talking about, notably from some First Nations. The Coastal First Nations is an alliance of 8 First Nations that live along BC's northern and central coast, and they've spoken out against Smith's project. Earlier this month, the group, along with BC Premier David Eby, signed a declaration doubling down on the support for an oil tanker ban that is currently in place and opposition to any sorts of exceptions or carve-outs. Joining me now is the president of the Coastal First Nations and elected chief of the Heitsluk First Nation, one of the 8 First Nations that make up that group. Marilyn Slett, nice to see you.
Good morning.
Tell us why you are opposed to this idea.
we've been very clear that we don't support this project. We've called upon the federal government to uphold the tanker ban. Our position is not a new position. It's been in place for many decades. And this is our home. We rely upon a healthy ocean to sustain our way of life. And adding oil tankers to this is just not something that we can support.
Danielle Smith and the Prime Minister and sort of their counterparts, people around them, have been in these negotiations for some time. You told CBC News, I understand, that you haven't heard from anyone really, the Prime Minister, the Energy Minister. I don't know if anyone has reached out to you, that you heard from an Alberta representative that was weeks ago. So what is your reaction to the fact that these conversations are happening without you at this stage anyway?
Yeah, it's incredibly alarming to wake up and read about or hear about things through the media, and this is how it has been for the past few months. Reading about these proposed discussions and creating pathways for a project that has significant impacts on our communities.
Do you really think that this is a possibility, given that, well, first of all, your opposition to it, which will be considered, BC Premier's opposition to it? Do you think that these are hurdles that the Alberta Premier can actually overcome?
Well, our position has been clear from the beginning, and we've spent decades protecting the ocean and the natural environment around us. So that is not going to stop with these proposed discussions and proposed MOUs. We will continue in this way, for as long as we are here. So no, it's not something that we can, support. And honestly, we don't hope that, the Canadian government will uphold, their duty to talk to us, to duty of the Crown. There's so many, factors involved here. So,
Marilyn, tell me why the tanker ban was such an important piece of legislation that the previous government put in place, that formalizing this ban, and why it matters so much to communities there.
Sure. I was reading some of the West Coast oil port inquiries that happened along the coast, including in Heiltsuk Territory and Namu. A couple of my uncles were providing testimony there, and an elder from our community, and this was in 1977. And he spoke about the industrialization and the resource extraction that was really building, in his lifetime. And he talked about an oil spill. And he said that this would, finish us. This would finish our community, our nation. And, our community ourselves, the Heiltsuk Nation has had an oil spill here in the territory in 2016 with the Nathan E. Stewart. So it's not an abstract thing for us. We're, living with the impacts of that spill today.
What would you hope that the Prime Minister and the Premier are considering as they reach this agreement that we'll understand the details of later this week?
Well, we're rights and title holders of these communities along the central, north, and Haida Gwaii coastline. And, we aren't going anywhere, to find other opportunities. This is our home. And, we've spent many years working with both the provincial and federal governments on, protection measures. So we would hope that, we can continue to do that work together, and that Canada would uphold the oil tanker moratorium in its entirety. It is not an oil tanker ban if they start making exceptions to it.
Marilyn Slett, President of the Coastal First Nations, thank you for getting up early for us this morning. Appreciate your time.
Jessica.
Later in the hour, our Sunday Scrum will be here to talk more about the Alberta-Ottawa MOU. But first, questions about Canada-U.S. relations top of mind for American lawmakers who are in Canada right now at the annual Halifax International Security Forum. We will speak with the top Democrat on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee about the relations between our two countries and that confusion around the U.S. peace plan for Ukraine. Our exclusive interview back in 2.
On Ukraine, in terms of the proposed U.S. peace plan, what issues do you see with that plan as it stands? And you said, not just you, but the coalition yesterday, that there are some elements that could serve as a basis for peace. What are those elements?
Well, we like point number one. Ukraine is a sovereign nation. Okay, that was a good start. There are a host of other issues which are going to be fed back directly and literally are being fed back today in conversations amongst the national security advisors.
Prime Minister Carney speaking this morning at the G20 summit, where Western leaders say the U.S. plan for Ukraine needs, quote, additional work. Global leaders are also gathering in Nova Scotia over this past weekend for the annual Halifax International Security Forum. The theme this year, the principle of democracy, and the scale of the meeting is significant against the backdrop of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the efforts to end it. Politicians are amongst those attending the conference, including top lawmakers from the United States. Jeanne Shaheen is the top Democrat on the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations and is a senator from New Hampshire. She joins us this morning from Halifax. Nice to see you, Senator.
Nice to be with you.
I obviously want to spend most of our time talking about the Canada-U.S. relationship, but I do want to start on Ukraine, because that has dominated discussions there at the Security Forum where you are, and of course is in the news today. So there is now a conversation happening in Geneva, negotiations between the United States, Ukraine, and others about this 28-point plan that the U.S. has put forward. What do you think of the plan as it looks now? And do you think it's something that reflects what Ukraine needs?
Absolutely not. I was very disappointed to see that 28-point plan. I think it's a plan that looks like the Russians and Vladimir Putin wrote it. It's nothing but a Putin wish list for what they want to get out of that unprovoked war in Ukraine that Russia started. We need to hold the Russians and Putin accountable for what's happened during that war. We need to ensure that Ukraine's interests are maintained. And, you know, it's not just about the war in Ukraine, which I certainly have supported Ukraine's side against Russia's awful attack that has been horrific. So many people killed, so much destruction because Vladimir Putin wants to expand Russia's reach into Europe. But it's also about what our other adversaries are going to take away from this conflict. China is going to look at this, North Korea is going to look at this, Iran's going to look at this, and if the United States walks away from Ukraine, they're going to say, well, we don't have to worry. We can go into other sovereign countries. China can say, well, we can go into Taiwan. Iran can continue its activities across the Middle East. North Korea can look at its designs on South Korea. So there are significant long-term ramifications for what we do here.
Who do you think wrote this plan as it stands now? It is very unclear whether it was authored by Russia, whether this is a draft plan, or whether, as Marco Rubio says now, it was written by the United States. What is your understanding?
It's not clear to me who authored the draft that has been released, but I hope that negotiations going forward are going to include Ukrainian interests and recognize that what we need to make sure is that Ukraine has a security guarantee for the long term and that Russia can't continue to advance and engage in its hybrid attacks in Europe.
Senator, let's talk now about Canada-U.S. relations. It's been a month now since talks collapsed between Canada and the United States. The president obviously angered by that ad that Ontario ran through the United States. What is your sense about how or if these talks can get restarted?
Well, I certainly hope they can get restarted. It's in not just Canada's interest, it's in the United States' interest to restart these talks. I live in a border state, New Hampshire. We do a lot of business with Canada. We have a lot of Canadian tourists who come down. We have missed you all this year. We want you to come back to the United States. It's important to New Hampshire. It's important to our economy, to the U.S. economy. And these tariffs have been a real difficult economic had a difficult economic impact, not just in Canada, but in the United States. Every business I've visited in New Hampshire has been hurt by the tariffs. And so we need to get back to the negotiating table. USMCA, the North American Trade Agreement, comes up for reauthorization this coming year. We need to work on that. We need to get this done. It's in the interest of both countries.
You were part of that bipartisan effort last month in the Senate. I talked to Senator Kane about it to try and nullify U.S. tariffs on Canada. Why was that important to you, given that it was, it was largely symbolic because we knew that the House wouldn't take it up, but why was that important to you?
Well, it was important because of the impact those tariffs are having on American businesses, on American households. In the U.S., we think an average household is going to pay about $1,800 more this year because of those tariffs. And so I joined Senator Kane in his effort to overturn it. I also helped to lead a brief at the Supreme Court that included 36 bipartisan senators, 171 House members, to say to the Supreme Court what President Trump is doing under this, our IEPA, what we call our IEPA law, is illegal and it should not stand.
Do you think the Supreme Court is going to rule on that eventually? Where do you think that might land? And how do you think that could influence the president? Or will he just find other ways around that decision?
Well, I think it will have it depends on what the Supreme Court does,
Sure.
What the administration does. But I think if they rule against the administration, it will have significant impact. And the administration has said they'll abide by whatever the court decides. Now, we don't know how the court is going to come down. There are a lot of real serious questions about how the administration is using the law. I don't think any objective observer thinks that there's an emergency with Canada and that Canada is having a dangerous impact on America's national security. I think that's just not sellable. And so the Supreme Court raised serious questions about the president's use of those emergency powers.
Do you think that the economic impact in the United States of tariffs, whether it be on Canada or other countries, is starting to be felt on Americans, and that might either impact the president or perhaps the midterms? Absolutely.
The biggest issue I hear from my constituents in New Hampshire is the rising costs of living, the impact of the tariffs on grocery prices, the impact on rent, on electricity prices, on childcare, all of the major expenses that families have to pay have increased since Donald Trump took office, and the tariffs are a big piece of that.
Senator Sheehan, let me end on this. Right now, the Canadian government is sort of waiting for the president to return to the table and diversifying trade. The Prime Minister right now in South Africa doing that very thing. What do you think about that approach? Do you think that it is now, the onus is now on the president to return to the table, or is it possible that these talks just don't resume?
I think it's in everyone's interest for the talks to resume. Look, the United States and Canada have had one of the most complementary, most important trade relationships, one of the best friendships of any two countries in history, certainly from the United States perspective. And we want to restore the good relationship with Canada. That's why we had a strong bipartisan delegation here at the Halifax Security Forum to say we are here because we know how important relationships with Canada are. We know how important the economic relationship is, and we want to do everything we can to improve that.
Okay. Senator Shaheen, good of you to make the time for us while you're in the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
After that anti-tariff ad that so upset U.S. President Donald Trump, where do things stand now? Ontario's envoy to Washington, David Patterson, is here with me next. It has been a month since Trump abruptly hit pause on trade talks with Canada as Ottawa works to restart those talks. The Prime Minister was asked today if he's been in contact with Trump.
I mean, it's a detail. It's a detail. I spoke to him. I'll speak to him again when it matters. I look forward to speaking to the President soon, but I don't have a burning issue to speak with the President about right now.
Talks fell apart after the government of Ontario released this ad, an anti-tariff ad featuring a speech from former President Ronald Reagan, and the talks have not been restarted since. David Patterson is Ontario's representative in Washington. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Rosemary.
I know that you had Cabinet Minister Carolyn Maroney down in Washington with you this past week, and I'm wondering what has been the reception for Ontario politicians and cabinet ministers these days.
Yeah, we had a wonderful day on Capitol Hill this week with Minister Mulroney, and an extremely warm welcome right across Senate and House, you know, and of course a lot of warm feelings for her late father. And the work that they did to get us our first free trade agreement. And so we had some great discussions. And, you know, she is essentially the counterpoint to the Appropriations Committee for Ontario. And so we had some very good discussions about trade and about the relationship.
I wonder whether the infamous ad, you and I haven't spoken since then, came up. Of course, that is what we understand is sort of ended the talks that were ongoing. Did that come up at all with any of those officials, and did they say anything about the ad?
Not really, to be honest. Maybe one Republican mentioned it because we were having a discussion about Ronald Reagan and the Mulroney family. So it was very much not on the focus. Lots of other developments taking place here in Washington as well. So lots to talk about while we're in Congress.
We reported last month that Premier Ford's, I don't know if it's anti-Trump rhetoric, but some of the things he was saying were hurting trade talks. Do you think that the approach that Ontario has taken, which I think you would agree has been very forceful, quite strong, has been helping or hurting? What's your assessment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is genuinely here in Washington a respect for strength and standing up for your people. And no question, Premier Ford is always going to do that and has been making sure protecting Ontario and our workers are the number one thing. We talked about that an awful lot this week with both Republican and Democrat representatives, and they understand absolutely that we want to protect our people. And a lot of the discussion goes to protecting their people as well, because as they've come back from the shutdown, talking to their businesses and their people, they're very aware that a great number of their jobs are actually to export to Canada, and they want to make sure that those are preserved as well.
Do you think that the ad was a mistake? There are some people who think that it did exactly what it was intended to do, which was to get the president's attention, and other people who say, well, now we're not talking, so that's not the outcome we wanted. What do you make of it?
Well, I think there's many ways to look at it. It certainly probably set some records in terms of the number of people that saw it around the world in the, I think, 15 billion range. And so in terms of educating people about trade and talking about jobs and what they mean and getting people focused on it, that's what we do every day here. And so I think it was extremely successful in that regard. Not a lot of sort of negativity about it. More people are sort of shifting gears to, okay, well, what will be the role of Congress as we go into next year and we start to renew the USMCA, but we still have these sectoral tariffs that are taking place. The companies have all just put in their submissions to the USTR on the USMCA, and they're overwhelmingly saying, you know, let's maintain trade with Canada and make sure that this keeps our economy going. And so that's what you tend to hear here in Washington. I realize there's some other areas of focus. I was up for a brief period in a colorful period in my home country of Canada, and it's nice to be back here doing the work in Washington.
Do you think that the president overreacted?
To what? Sorry?
To the ad.
Obviously, we all want to get back into the discussion. Met with the ambassador.
Yeah.
They are looking for opportunities to get going. There's some unilateral activities happening as well, though. You've seen that there's been adjustments on tariffs on about 200 food areas, coffee, and other things here. And there's some discussion as well about the possibility of the United States unilaterally dropping tariffs on steel and aluminum if it is to be used in their manufacturing facilities. And so there is, I think, an awareness that the integration between our economies as either a supplier or as a market is starting to catch up with the agenda. People are feeling that in their districts, and there's no substitute for talking about those things. And we continue to have a very warm kind of welcome here in the United States in those conversations.
So obviously you still think talks are possible. I wonder whether you think the approach right now by the Canadian government federally, which seems to be, we're here if you want to talk, give us a call, kind of waiting it out a little bit, whether you think that is the right path forward, or whether we should be trying to engage, have more negotiations, more conversations directly with the White House.
Yeah, I think the USTR and Commerce are ready to re-engage on the president's signal, and it's entirely up to him in terms of when that will take place. But the clock is ticking towards a renewal on the USMCA. And so these issues will come to us either through dealing with inflation in the United States, dealing with companies needing to get more certainty into their supply chains, or just a crossover of these things. And so ultimately we want them to be successful and they want us to be successful. We have to keep on working towards that. And so I think it is the right approach. It's the only approach. And in the meantime, everybody working together in Canada to diversify and make sure that we keep our people protected.
But do you think that trade talks will start soon? Do you have any indication from anyone that you're talking to that is likely to happen in the near term?
No, I mean that's in the quarter of the federal government,
Sure.
And a tight-knit group of negotiators, and we want to support them. We in the provinces do a lot of that kind of work, dealing with senators and members of the House from our border states and our key trading partners, and keep reminding people that, you know, we buy more than twice as much as China. So a lot of jobs depend on us getting this right. And I feel that it's sort of, it's turning. Lots of things turning here in Washington that we're also following. But trade is, I think, one of those things. And so I suspect we will get back into discussion one way or the other. And we have to, in terms of being able to discuss the USMCA in any case.
I'll just end on this. Right after the trade talks ended, we and some others reported, this isn't news to you, that Ambassador Hoekstra was swearing at you at an event here in Ottawa. And that, and I talked to people who overheard it and saw it, and they were quite stunned at the use of language by the ambassador. I wonder how that made you feel, David Patterson, to take the brunt of that from him directly.
Well, I have to say, I've heard salty language before, and I think my mother taught me well to just say nothing and not react. But ultimately, we want Ambassador Hoekstra to be successful, and we need him to be successful and to understand Canada and to be able to communicate the importance to the United States of what Canada does as well. And so I just signed my Christmas card to him, and we'll turn the page and keep on working. I'm focused down here in Washington.
Did he apologize to you or call you or anything or reach out?
No, and I didn't expect that. But on we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're a bigger person than I am, David Patterson. Listen, we'll speak again. Thanks for giving us your perspective from there.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Tensions over Alberta's pipeline proposal heating up just a few days away from the expected signing of that memorandum of understanding between Ottawa and the province. What is at stake? Our Sunday Scrum is standing by. We'll be right back.
We are making a very, very strong case that building a new pipeline to Asian markets is in the national interest. We are finding some receptivity on the part of the new Prime Minister, and I would say if we're going to get a deal, it will be in a matter of weeks.
This is a broadside attack on an oil tanker ban that is the foundation of economic growth mapped out for the entire country for the foreseeable future. And it just makes no sense to me that we're not at the table being able to make that case.
Ottawa and Alberta appear close to signing that memorandum of understanding about the energy sector writ large, but also a pipeline proposal. Hurdles there from British Columbia remain, as you heard from the Premier. So how much room is there for compromise? What are the political risks here for Ottawa and for Alberta? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Sherelle Evelyn, Managing Editor of the Hill Times. Ryan Tumulty, Toronto Star reporter here in Ottawa. Gary Mason, columnist for the Globe and Mail, and he's in Vancouver. So let's start with you, Gary, because I promised I would, but also because those the comments from Premier Eby are, he takes a very assertive approach that I think largely reflects what a lot of people in British Columbia believe, that tanker ban is a really important thing.
Yeah, I think there's no question that it is, certainly to the people in northern British Columbia, specifically the First Nations along the coast. I think that what's irking Premier Eby the most, maybe not the most, but what's bothering him is that these negotiations seem to be taking place between Alberta and the federal government, and even the government in Saskatchewan seem to be involved in these talks. And British Columbia, over whose land this pipeline would travel and from which coast it would be, the oil would leave from, they're being completely left out of these discussions. And I can't help but think, how Alberta would feel, a province that is so protective of its sovereignty. How would they feel if negotiations were taking place about a project that was going to run across their land, a portion of which a lot of people in First Nations disagree with? I mean, they would be outraged. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that I'm against this pipeline, but the process, I think, leaves a lot to be desired. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the twinning of the TMX pipeline. British Columbia was against that. They went to court to fight it. It was just all was for naught, and it ended up, they ended up getting a pipeline shoved down their throat. And the same thing could happen here. There's no question about it.
It's really unclear to me, Sherelle, and obviously we're speculating. That's what we do. But how much of this MOU is about a pipeline, and how much of it is about things that Alberta will commit to doing from a climate perspective in order for a pipeline to be considered. And that's why, I take your point, Gary, but I don't know that the Premier of BC needs to be part of the conversation yet. If it's really about how do you create an energy sector that is prosperous while fighting climate change.
Sure, but then why would the Premier of Saskatchewan need to be involved in that conversation? Just come back to that. Yeah. It's like once you start adding other people to the mix, you might as well get everybody involved. But I do take the point that yes, this could be an opportunity and opening for the Prime Minister and the federal government to say to the province of Alberta, okay, you want to do certain things. We want to create a framework that would allow those things to happen. Mm-hmm. What we don't really know, obviously, since we haven't seen the MOU, we don't really know, is this really, about the federal government saying, we are going to do what apparently everybody is asking of us, and that is to get out of the way. Mm-hmm. Even Premier Eby said it the other day. He said, we're not asking for help. We want Ottawa to get out of the way. So is this just the federal government saying, if we lay this groundwork, we tell you what the parameters are, and we throw our hands up and say, it's all up to you. Can you do it in this framework? I mean, it's hard at that point politically to argue and say that Ottawa is stopping us. This is a problem. This is fueling a national unity crisis and so on and so forth, because they've been given either the tools that they need to succeed or the length of rope.
Yeah, and Ryan, is that what this is really about? About sort of removing the political cudgel that the Premier of Alberta has over Ottawa and putting it all in her court?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think, the Carney government is perhaps more on board than the Trudeau government was with seeing the oil sands expand and seeing more production there. But they are, in order to agree to that, they are putting things on the table. And they've actually been fairly clear that, you need to reform Alberta's carbon pricing system. You need to see the Pathways carbon capture project move forward. And if you do some of those things, then maybe they can talk about a pipeline. But I do think, as everyone has said, BC is the last bit here, and someone needs to talk to them. Because, absolutely under constitutional law, BC doesn't have a veto. But trying to build one without their support just guarantees you years of litigation, and that's not what the Alberta government is looking for, I would hope. There also, of course, don't have anyone stepped up to build this pipeline yet. This is a theoretical project at this point.
And I wonder, Gary, how much, whether that might change. That, certainly that's what Jason Kenney said off the top of the show, that the minute you start to remove some of the concerns that private industry has, the more likely it is that a proponent pops up.
Well, yeah, there's no question about that. But where and when that approval is going to come, to me, I just can't see it right now. I mean, I can't see the coastal First Nations, for example, giving their okay to, removal of the tanker ban. I mean, personally, I think, oil can be shipped out of there safely. I mean, oil is shipped all across the world in waters that are more treacherous than the Hecate Strait. So it can be done with tugboats, and you can take enormous precautions to make sure that the oil gets out of there safely. But, until you have buy-in from the First Nations, I'm not sure that you'll get buy-in from the BC government. So I think it's actually more important to get buy-in from the First Nations. You're still going to scare off potential investors. The other question, Rosemary, the big question is, where is all this money coming from? I mean, the carbon sequestration project alone is like $20 billion. You're talking about a pipeline that's going to cost like probably $40 billion. I mean, there is a lot of money, a lot of unanswered questions. Maybe we'll get some of those questions answered when the memorandum of understanding is detailed. But right now, there's just a lot of unanswered questions.
Cheryl, what about the proposal that the Premier of BC put forward and said, listen, you have a pipeline, just expand capacity, use it all, and then look for other opportunities. Jason Kenney said, listen, that would actually get us a little bit further. He would prefer both, I'm sure, but maybe that's the compromise here.
I mean, it could be. David Eby said that the reason that conversation isn't happening, or is to the degree that this other conversation is happening, he said it's political. It's sure. It's the continued drive of Alberta wanting that political wedge issue about having that additional pipeline, landlocking Alberta's resources, national unity crisis, and so on and so forth. So if that conversation is going to continue to dominate, then, it could very well be that TMX could be expanded, and that could happen, on a dual track, so to speak. But I don't think that it's actually going to, whether or not that expansion does happen, in terms of maximizing the capacity of Trans Mountain, I don't think that it's going to make a real difference in the conversation about a pipeline to the North Coast.
Ryan, how much could this, though, this whatever the MOU is here, how much does it change the relationship between Ottawa, between Alberta and the rest of the country? And is there not an advantage to doing that?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And I think you've already seen Danielle Smith start talking about Ottawa in much more glowing terms than she ever talked about the Trudeau government. And I think there's a way to solve some of these issues. I think the TMX compromise that you raised is a good option. The taxpayer already owns TMX. Why wouldn't we consider this option to make it more productive? Keeping in mind that it's not full at the moment. It hasn't been used to its full capacity yet. So certainly I think there's going to be a lot of questions that the Alberta government is going to have to answer. But I think also if Ottawa doesn't come across as outright refusing and outright hostile to the idea of energy sector expansion, if they put forward an idea of how it can happen inside of our climate change targets, it might actually improve the relationship with Canada in the long run.
I mean, it is remarkable that all of this has happened in, like a year and a bit, that there has been this shift where we're back to talking about another pipeline, whether it happens or not. Sherelle Evelyn, Ryan Tumulty, Gary Mason, thank you all for spending part of your Sunday with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rosie.
Thanks, Rosie.
We'll be right back. As we discussed off the top of the show, Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Modi have indeed agreed to launch negotiations for a Canada-India trade agreement, free trade agreement. That will be something they'll work on in the months ahead. Alberta and Ottawa are expected to sign that energy deal as early as this Thursday. And keep your eye on what is happening in Geneva today as those peace talks with Ukraine, the United States, continue in an effort to try to bring peace to Ukraine without overpromising to Russia. Thanks for watching on this Sunday. I'll see you back here next Sunday, if not before. Have a good day.